Donald Trump claims he's settled a war between two countries and he received a golden crown from another. He is on a tour of Asia. But the big event is still to happen, a face-to-face meeting with the Chinese President Xi Jinping. What can we expect from that meeting and what does it mean for the rest of the world? We'll discuss on this latest episode of the BBC's daily news podcast, Newscast. Hello, it's Adam in the Newscast studio. And first of all, we are turning our attention to South Korea because that is where Donald Trump has arrived for a meeting with lots of other Asian and Pacific nations. And the thing everyone has got their eye on is happening on Thursday, and it's a face-to-face meeting between him and President Xi of China. Now, in a nutshell, Donald Trump introduced all his trade tariffs on Chinese goods back in April. China retaliated. Then things sort of settled down for a bit until China then put big restrictions on the exports of so-called rare earths to the US. Donald Trump then said he'd retaliate with a massive trade tariff on China. And it looks like they may have found a solution to reduce the tension. At least that's what everyone's going to be watching for when the two leaders meet on Thursday. And because it's the two biggest economies in the world, there's lots of other stuff attached to it as well. And the two people who can help us understand it are with us on Newscast right now. First of all, let's speak to our China correspondent, but she's in South Korea today, Laura Bicker. Hi, Laura.
Hello, my love. Hope you're doing well.
And also joining us from the US, but also now in Asia, is Anthony Zuricher from Americast. Hello, Anthony.
America Anthony, hello.
Yes. So, Laura, just explain the geography of where you both are, because I think you're quite near each other, but not in the same place.
Yeah, so near and yet so far. So we're both in the ancient capital of Gyeongju. It's down in the south of South Korea. And Anthony is in the bubble, I believe, with the US president. I've been covering things from outside and we've not managed to meet, even though we're probably just within a few miles of one another. I'm pretty sure if I headed up to the roof and waved, he might be able to see me from somewhere.
Well, glad we could bring you together. Anthony, just talk us through the Trump timeline of this week, where he's been and where he's going to be.
Well, he started out in Malaysia, the first stop at the Asian conference, and I was not with him there. I actually picked him up in Tokyo, Japan, where he came and he had a meeting with the new prime minister of Japan, held a rally with her on an aircraft carrier in a U.S. Navy base nearby, had some business dinners with various Japanese and American business leaders. And then earlier today, we hopped on Air Force One and flew from Tokyo into Busan, South Korea, and then took some helicopters to the city we're in now. And Donald Trump has been meeting with President Lee, the leader of South Korea, and having dinner with some of the other leaders, some of the other Asian leaders who are here for the APEC conference.
And Laura, when do we think Trump and President Xi will see each other face to face, or just the two of them?
So tomorrow, our time, we're expecting President Xi to arrive at the local airport where we think President Trump will leave from. There'll be a few hours crossover and that highly significant summit, that highly significant and anticipated meeting between the world's two largest economies will take place finally. I think we've been waiting for it all year.
And Laura, I mean, there's a huge list of bullet points that the two men will be covering. So should we just start going through the list? Trade, where have we actually got to with the trade battle between the US and China? And where could this meeting take that?
Right, so we think that China and the US have agreed some kind of framework. Let's start on the kind of main points. TikTok. We do think they do have a deal on TikTok, and that would transfer the app to US ownership, although Chinese would still have some say. When it comes to tariffs, President Trump has said today that he's prepared to lower the tariffs on China. We're not sure how low that will go, but that will depend on China's reciprocating factors. Now, one of the things that China did just before this meeting is they decided to restrict rare earths and exporting of rare earths. Now, what are these things that everybody keeps talking about? These are these minerals that are needed from everything, from the smartphone you carry in your pocket to wind turbines to, crucially, for many American manufacturers, cars and also many bits of military equipment. And I think when it comes to that, China really has control, not just of what goes to the United States, but what goes around the world. 90% of all rare earths are processed by China. So that gives you an idea of the chokehold they have on this. And that's one of the key issues here, because China is keeping hold of that. How much will they relinquish and what will they want in return? America wants China to buy more soybeans. Now, China has stopped buying soybeans from US farmers, and in fact, that is a real key factor for the US. So it may well be that America really wants China to buy more of those soybeans in hopes that perhaps they get in return rare earths. So those are some of the key points that we'll be looking for tomorrow when that meeting takes place.
Anthony, a few things for you then. First of all, the political significance of soybeans. Just explain that, because I remember when I was in Brussels during Trump's first term and the president of the European Commission then, Jean-Claude Juncker, went to DC for a big showdown and came back and managed to defuse the showdown by offering to buy loads and loads of American soybeans. What's the big deal here?
Well, it is a massive export crop for American agriculture. It's one of the fastest growing crops in the United States, and part of it is because it is so sought after, not just in the United States, but abroad, particularly in Asia. So it is a crop that American farmers really do depend on. It's relatively easy for them to grow. And having been cut off now from their largest market, China, these soybean farmers are really starting to feel the pain, and they're feeling the pain in states and in constituencies that Donald Trump has courted and won over the past 10 years. So he's listening to them, and his Treasury Secretary, his Secretary of Commerce, both have said they understand that these soybean farmers need to have some sort of a resolution to this, which is why they are pushing so hard to get China to resume its purchases.
And Anthony, on TikTok, there have been so many twists and turns in this saga, from Congress passing a law saying it can't be Chinese owned and operate in America at the same time, to this the brinkmanship, which saw it being turned off briefly in America. Does it now look like this is going to come to an end, and actually TikTok's future for American users and well, all around the world is kind of secured now?
It's looking that way. Donald Trump has really pushed hard, and he has worked on the edge of this law, offering extensions to China in order to keep it from TikTok from being shut off now for 90-day periods since the beginning of his presidency, even though the federal law that was passed by a bipartisan majority in Congress and with the backing of President Joe Biden, it doesn't really give the president permission to give these kind of extensions. So he has really pushed hard to try to get some sort of a solution. It sounds like they've found one, and found one that could put TikTok under the control of some close political allies of Donald Trump. So this is a massive social media company with a huge audience that could be controlled by conservatives friendly to Donald Trump even.
Also, Anthony, it seems like the trade in fentanyl, that synthetic opioid, that's going to be quite a big feature of the conversation between Trump and Xi.
Right. Fentanyl is something that has been a very real concern for Donald Trump, again, because it affects his constituencies, white working class voters, particularly in some of these rural states. The scourge of fentanyl has really devastated American communities, and it's been a campaign promise of his since 2015, 2016 to address this. And he identifies China as a major source of the export of fentanyl precursors. And what he would like to see, and what has been the subject of these negotiations, is for China to restrict these exports in order to control the spread of fentanyl. And it sounds like China may be taking some steps because that has been a key sticking point and a key point of emphasis for Trump for quite some time now.
And Laura, just on the big geopolitics of this, do China feel that they've come out of this pretty well? Because I'm just thinking about other American trading partners who basically had to roll over and accept Trump's terms, whether it's the UK or the EU, quite spectacularly. Does China feel actually he's met his match with them?
I think China will feel that whatever happens with this trade deal, they've come out of it a winner. I think the contrast, especially being here in South Korea, where today they've rolled out the red carpet, they've awarded Donald Trump one of the country's highest honours, and they've given him this huge golden crown, all to lay the path to make sure that they've got a smooth trade deal. And yet you've got China that said right from the outside, no, we are not doing this. We're going to return your tariffs. No, we're not doing this. We're going to up the ante even more. China has kept pushing back every single step of the way. Now, let's be clear. It has caused China pain. But China was also ready for this right from the offset, right when they even thought that Donald Trump might become president again. They decided to learn lessons from his last term. What they've done is diversify. They've ensured that they're no longer as reliant on exporting goods to the United States. And even in the last year, that has fallen significantly. So last year, about 19% of Chinese exports went to the US. Within the first few months of this year, around 11% of exports went to the United States. So it just goes to show just how quickly China can diversify, just how quickly they can sell to other countries. And I think that is the message that they will go in there. Yes, I think we'll probably see some kind of friendship between China and the United States. There will be, some friendly acts between the two. But ultimately, Beijing will go away from this saying, look, we stood up to the United States. We are a winner in this trade war. And also, I think the key point here in Gyeongju, President Trump has come for a couple of days. He will leave. In that space, you leave China, you leave President Xi with world leaders here in Gyeongju. That 60% of the world's GDP leaders will meet here. And that you're increasingly seeing Beijing at the centre of major world events, major global gatherings. And once again, that's what we'll see this weekend.
Laura, while you were talking, I was listening, I promise, but I also had a quick look at this South Korean gold crown that they handed him. So it's in a glass box, and it looks to me like the kind of crown, it's not really designed to be worn, because it's kind of like torso-sized.
Hey, listen, I'd give it a go. It is a huge, huge crown. It's from the Shilla dynasty. It was worn 1,500 years ago. And I think it's a replica, obviously, of that original crown. But yeah, it is glittering gold. And I mean, he did say he loved it, especially the Medal of Honor that he was given, this country's highest honor. He said he was keen to wear that medal as soon as possible.
And Anthony, we had another one of these Trump peace deals that was signed, this time between Thailand and Cambodia. And he oversaw the signing of that peace deal in Malaysia. Can we chalk this up as a genuine peace deal, as an actual war resolved, or is this another quite Trumpian exaggeration about his power in world affairs?
It's probably a little more of the latter, although, there were some very real tensions between Thailand and Cambodia. This is a normalization of relations, a normalization of the border between the two. Donald Trump is going to add it to his list of, I think he's up to 9 now, wars that he has ended, and that certainly is an exaggeration, but it's one that he is taking credit for, and he was there during the signing ceremony, standing presiding over it, and he was given credit by both sides for having helped to broker it. He, the Japanese prime minister nominated him for the Nobel Peace Prize, which he likes to tout as well. He actually had a lunch today in South Korea where the dessert was called the Peacemaker dessert, and so the South Koreans as well touting and honoring him by giving him that award, saying that he has helped to stabilize relations between North and South Korea. And the award was also for things he may do sometime in the future. So it is part of the playbook for dealing with Trump, for currying his favor, to try to stroke his ego, to try to build up what they think he wants. And it's very clear, because Donald Trump talks about it all the time now, that he wants to be seen as a peacemaker, and he wants, more than anything, it seems, to win a Nobel Prize. So it is an easy way for these foreign leaders to try to make a connection with Donald Trump. And you saw it in every step of the way on this Asian trip.
I mean, we've got peas pudding in the UK. What's a peas dessert?
Do you want me to read the description
Please
here?
do,
It
yes.
is
Unless it's
golden
gross.
citrus. No, actually, it sounds quite good. It is a golden citrus dessert with gold-adorned brownie and seasonal fruits served with buckwheat tea. Gold, of course, for Donald Trump, a favorite color, a favorite ornamentation of his. You don't have to go too far in the White House these days to see the gold leaf he has added to the Oval Office and the Cabinet Room and just about everywhere else.
Even when it comes to food. Laura, last question for you about the region. Trump is not going to meet Kim Jong-un of North Korea, is he? And in fact, Kim Jong-un's gone the other direction and has actually done another missile test instead of having a meeting.
So when it comes to Kim Jong-un, there was a lot of speculation. Would he, won't he, would he, won't he? Actually, we went up to the border and kind of had a peer across into North Korea just in case, there was a big meeting between the two. I've been at every single one of the meetings between Donald Trump and Kim Jong-un, so I didn't want to miss this one either. Look, what is Kim Jong-un up to, firing a missile just as Donald Trump arrives on the peninsula? Well, one, it was a cruise missile, so it didn't break UN sanctions. It does give them a little bit of attention, though. And I think when it comes to the invitation, there was nothing to lose from Donald Trump's side. I think it would have just been a photo op and a handshake, but it may have led to further negotiations between Pyongyang and Washington. And actually, there was nothing to lose from Kim Jong-un's side, but obviously from North Korea right now, they got no reply. And I think perhaps Donald Trump will think, right, okay, well, maybe we keep trying to contact them, keep trying to reach out to Pyongyang in the hope that eventually they will reply in the positive. But right now, the timing doesn't seem right for Kim Jong-un.
And Anthony, last question for you, and it's back to where we started the conversation about soybeans. Is it true that Scott Bessent, the Treasury Secretary, is a soybean farmer? Because I always thought he was a billionaire who made loads of money from betting against the British pound on Black Wednesday in the 90s.
Yes, he said that in an interview recently, that he can identify with the plight of the soybean farmers in the United States because he too is one, although I don't think he looks quite like your typical farmhand, much more like the Wall Street, New York insider that he is.
Yeah, I can't imagine him in dungarees. Anthony, thank you very much.
My pleasure.
And Laura, great to catch up with you too.
Thanks, Adam.
Now, for the second part of today's newscast, we wanted to speak to the BBC's climate change editor, Justin Rowlatt, because today, on Wednesday, the government has published an updated version of its carbon reduction plans. And the reason it had to publish an updated version is they were told to by the courts because their previous version wasn't detailed enough. Now, there was a slight problem. When we actually spoke to Justin Rowlatt, we hadn't seen the new version of the document yet. So that kind of scuppered that bit of the conversation. And then Justin said, well, actually, there's something even more significant going on in the climate change community at the moment. And it's discussion about Hurricane Melissa in the Caribbean, which has caused loads of destruction in Jamaica and Cuba and is heading towards Bermuda. So that is the conversation you will hear with Justin Rowlatt, the BBC's climate change editor, instead. Well, climate editor Justin Rowlatt is here. Hello.
Hiya. Well, since I've been here.
It actually has, yeah. Climate change sorted? No. Should we be transparent in that we were actually waiting for this new climate change plan from the government to be published as a result of some legal action in a case that the government lost. And two things. One, as we're recording at 3:30 on Wednesday, the plan hasn't been published yet.
Despite them telling us it would be published an hour, two and a half hours
Yeah,
ago.
so there's nothing we can actually say yet. And also you said...
I've got loads I could say, but...
Well, we have to wait for the plan, though, don't we? And then secondly, you said, well, no, it's much more important to talk about the Hurricane Melissa in the Caribbean. Why do you think that's such an important thing to talk about? Obviously, I mean, we've seen lots of destruction in Jamaica. It's a big event in itself.
It's a huge event in itself. There is a climate component to tropical storms, the formation of tropical storms, the way they behave. Let's talk a bit about that in a moment. And therefore, I think it's really important that we acknowledge these huge kind of events when they happen and acknowledge the destruction that we see and the link to climate change in order to focus people's attention, because the world does seem to be forgetting a bit about the consequences of climate change.
So in terms of Hurricane Melissa, as we're recording now, it's crossed Jamaica, caused a huge amount of damage, which is still becoming clear. It's hit Cuba and it's moving northeast towards the Bahamas. What is the climate change aspect to this story then?
So Tropical storms are incredibly complex. It's very hard to collect data, very hard to say for certain what factors drive storms. But very broadly, there are some trends that we can talk about that scientists have looked into that involve climate change. Now, the first thing to be very clear on, and in a sense this is quite good news, is scientists are saying we shouldn't expect more of these storms. We're probably not going to get more storms, but you knew there was a but in there. But the storms we get are more likely to be big. They're more likely to be like Melissa, the larger storms. And that's because the storms are created by the heat energy in the ocean and in the air. So the warmer the seas are, and the seas are very warm in the Caribbean, which is why Melissa is so strong, the warmer the seas are, the more energy that's delivered to the storm system as it forms, the more ferocious the winds are. The warmer the air, the more moisture is held in the air, the more rain falls when the storm passes over places like Jamaica. And there are a couple of other really interesting developing trends. So one of the features of Melissa was it intensified. It got stronger really, really quickly. We've seen that in quite a few hurricanes recently, and that appears to be a trend. Now, the science isn't entirely clear on it, but it does seem to be becoming more likely. And with more heat, energy in the air, in the atmosphere, and in the sea, there's a logical kind of link, but that is very kind of provisional science. And the other very provisional finding that we've got is that there is this trend for storms to move more slowly. Now, Melissa, when it was sitting off Jamaica, was moving at like 2 miles an hour, slow walking pace. It did accelerate a bit as it went into Jamaica. And noteworthy, this is the biggest storm ever in recorded history since 1851, when the first hurricane records were taken, to biggest storm ever to have hit Jamaica. But when it hit Jamaica, it was more like a kind of brisk walk or a jog. That's still not very quick, and means that you're exposed to those ferocious winds, the heavy rain for longer, means more intense, means more catastrophic damage.
I also just wonder, does it mean more uncertainty, like the weather patterns are less predictable?
It means more volatility. I mean, whether that affects the ability of weather forecasters to predict the storm. They saw the storm forming extraordinarily off Africa. They saw the kind of, the template of a tropical storm, and then followed it across the entire Atlantic as it picked up energy, speed and moisture and became this huge storm. So whether it affects that particularly, sorry to be really technical, but given the role of AI improving our weather forecasts, whether it makes it less predictable, I don't know.
And we were talking to Emma Pinchbeck from the Climate Change Committee the other day there about the UK's plans for adaptation. I mean, can what's happened in Jamaica this week, for example, tell us anything about how well or badly the world is preparing for the new era of extreme weather?
I'm not sure it can really, as an individual event, can really shed that much light on the sort of global effort to adapt to climate change. I think, what is clear is the world is not adapting fast enough, and all the indicators suggest that's the case. That of course, will be what Emma will have told you when she came into the studio.
You talked about AI being used to plot the path of these events, but also I've noticed there's a lot of AI fake imagery and videos online as well. So much so that when you see something that looks like it could be legit, you're then not sure if it's real. I mean, it's very confusing.
It's really weird. And I mean, it's one thing to kind of have AI sharks washing up on beaches, and you can see that would be quite an exciting image to create. But people are creating images that are like real images, but just maybe a tiny bit worse, more slates off the roof, the palm trees looking a bit more haggard. So these are really subtly changed images, and you kind of wonder why people are bothering to kind of sort of pollute the internet with these false images.
Right. Another thing, you're getting ready to go to COP, the UN Climate Change Conference. There's another one. They come around faster every year, even though it is at the same time. Give us some thoughts to prepare us for that.
Well, let's look at the UN. Every year before COP, UN does what it calls a synthesis report. It takes together the commitments that governments around the world have made to cutting carbon, and it looks at how that will bend the curve, if you like, how that's likely to affect temperatures in the future. And it was a pretty sorry kind of account this year. We had 64 countries had submitted new carbon cutting plans, and they're supposed to produce these new nationally determined commitments, these new commitments once every 5 years. So this is a big deal. Get them together and they can run through for the next decade until 2025. Just 64 countries made the deadline. And when you took together all the commitments they'd made, it looked as if their commitments would reduce emissions by just 10%. Now, you look at what the UN's climate science body says is necessary. It says in order to stay within that threshold that we all talk about all the time, 1.5 degrees, we know above that much more extreme weather. To stay within that, we need to cut by 2035, not 10%, but 57%. So way off target. Really, really worrying. Obviously, there's some really big players not in there. So the EU wasn't in there. China wasn't in there. The US, we may not even get a commitment from the US under Trump. So a lot of big emitters weren't in there, but really does. It's a really kind of sets a very negative tone at the beginning of this huge kind of global conference on climate change.
Well, and it highlights one of the aspects of the Paris Climate Change Agreement, which is that all of this is voluntary. Nothing happens to you if you don't submit as a country.
It's not
with
just
these
Paris,
NDCs.
that's the UN, that's all these international conferences, and it really is a problem. So they thought they'd had this really clever trick of kind of saying, we've got this really ambitious goal and the current commitments to change our policies to reduce emissions aren't sufficient to meet that goal. So what we'll do is we'll come back later and hopefully you'll have raised your ambition over time. And
it'll ratchet up and there'll be it'll go viral that everyone wants to join in.
And it'll be a race towards this. And the vision was that the cost of renewables would be falling and we'd all be kind of rushing towards this goal of decarbonisation. In some ways, a lot of that is actually happening, but the race to cut emissions, does seem to be faltering. Certainly in terms of the governmental commitments. So there is this debate about whether the real kind of climate action is now happening outside of the conference rooms in these huge UN conferences.
So give us some ways of thinking about this COP then, because I know they always try to focus it kind of in terms of what bit of the process it is going to be. Then they also try and just have some priority areas that everyone can unite around, just to sort of make it a bit more manageable. What are sort of the categories of things at this COP?
I mean, it's really interesting when you talk to the Brazilians kind of about the message that they want to send to the world about what's happening. They're saying, don't look for a big cover pledge, don't look for a huge commitment on forests or the reduction of coal use or anything like that. So they're saying there won't be a sort of signature policy coming out of this. They're also saying, look, most of the architecture of the Paris Agreement, most of the rules and regulations that govern the Paris Agreement, which I think when you went to COPs before, were the subject of really ferocious negotiations.
The Paris Rulebook, it's called.
Exactly. So they would say the Paris Rulebook is pretty much drawn up. So we've done that. So they'd say now it's about generating momentum. It's about getting institutions from governmental level and below. They keep talking about subnational bodies, getting that momentum going. They talk about a mutirão, I probably pronounced it absolutely terrible, which is an indigenous word meaning a kind of community get together to solve a problem. And they're saying we need to look to cities, companies, businesses, individuals, everybody. And in a way, I think if you were cynical, and we journalists do tend to be a bit cynical. Skeptical, that's exactly right. If you were skeptical, you'd look at this and say, they're worried with America. America's really interesting. It's not just out of the game. They're actually trying to, stop the game happening. They're working against the game. So with America out of the game, they're sort of saying, look, don't expect anything hugely ambitious. And they're hoping that, great commitments from cities and other subnational bodies will create a sense of progress coming out of this. That creates a really interesting dynamic for us, and particularly be very interesting to see what America decides to do. I mean, there was I don't know if you followed, there was a UN meeting of the IMO, the International Maritime Organization here in London. They'd agreed a deal that was going to
this huge new treaty
that was going to have the first ever carbon tax, a levy on shipping, tiny levy, fraction of a percent that was going to be raised and would raise money, would obviously cut emissions a certain amount, small amount. Again, the percentage would ratchet up over time. That deal had been done, taken 10 years to negotiate it. America came in with Saudi Arabia and Russia, and together they dismantled the consensus around it, delayed it for a year, and most people think effectively they've totally derailed the policy. The question now is, are they going to go to COP and play a similarly disruptive role? And of course, there are other international players, other nations that wouldn't mind disrupting some of the stuff that's done at COP.
And then, of course, Keir Starmer is going to go to Brazil, where the mood music was sort of that he might not, but he's obviously decided to get on the plane now.
Yeah, and I was speaking to the government today, and they're absolutely adamant that he will be going. And I think that's really interesting as well. It shows that the government is doubling down on its clean energy agenda. It's saying we really seriously are committed to tackling climate change, and that kind of an implicit support for so many other policies that have become signature policies for the government because, of course, the main opposition, Reform and the Tories, have really taken a decisive stand against so much of this, including the landmark, so many landmarks in climate policy, the landmark Climate Change Act, which, of course, was the first act that made it legally binding to cut carbon emissions, going full circle to what we were originally going to talk about, which is why there's this review of the government's carbon budget, because it was called into question by Friends of the Earth and others, not once but twice in legal actions, and they had to go back and redraw the budget.
Justin, thank you very much.
My pleasure. Thank you for having me.